Public folders. Public folders are just like a normal folder you create locally to manage your emails in Outlook. The main distinction between a normal folder and a public folder is that a public folder is accessible by more than one person. A public folder can be created from within Outlook if the user has the required permissions, or you can create public folders from Outlook Web Access, and that's a new feature of Exchange Server 2003, and you can also create public folders from the Exchange System Manager. In the Exchange System Manager, we'll expand our administrative groups, we'll expand our New York administrative group, and then we'll expand folders. And here you can see we have public folders, and if we click on that, in the right hand side you'll see we have one default entry which is for Internet News Groups. So we'll add a new public folder, we'll right click on Public Folders, and we'll select New, Public Folder. Now the first thing we need to do is give our public folder a name, and in this example we'll give it a name of Sales. We could also give this a description if you like, and we'll just call this one Sales Documents. Now at the bottom here we can see an option for maintaining per user read and unread information for this public folder. Now this is on by default, and of course you can turn it off if you like, but what this setting does is remembers who's read messages in a public folder and who hasn't. So in other words, if Bob logs in and views a message, the message will be marked as having been read. But if Jane then logs in, she'll see the message as unread because she yet hasn't viewed the message. Now on the Replication tab, we can use Replication to copy our public folders over to another server, but we'll get to that a bit later in this video. Now the Limits tab allows us to set size limits on message posted to our public folder. So in other words, if we wanted to set a maximum post to a size of say 2 meg, we could come down here and check the maximum item size, and in the box next to it we could simply enter 2048, which is the value of 2 meg. Now we can also issue warnings to people to remind them that if the public folder's size is approaching a certain limit, as well as we can block posts if the public folder does reach a certain size. Now I know it's logical, but I should point out that the issuing warning value here should be lower than the prohibit post value. Otherwise users won't get the warning message telling them that they're almost out of space. They just won't be able to post to the public folder. And Exchange doesn't give you any warning message telling you that you've configured these values incorrectly. So I thought that I should point that out instead. Now we also have deletion settings and age limits on post, both of which default using the public store settings. But if you uncheck either of these boxes, you can elect to use your own values. Now the deleted settings simply determine how long Exchange will keep a deleted item available for recovery. If you don't want deleted items to be retained at all, uncheck this box and then set a value of 0. Now in the age limits box, this determines how long a message will stay in the public folder until it's automatically deleted. If storage space is a concern on your server, it can be a good idea to use this feature to purge old items from your server. And finally we have the Details tab, which just lets us write any administrative notes for our public folder, such as why we created it. Okay, so back to our General tab, everything's entered in correctly, so we'll click OK. And if we just refresh this, we'll see our Sales public folder. Okay, so let's go and look at the properties of our public folder. So we'll right click on Sales and select Properties. And now we also have a Permissions tab. Okay, we've got three options here, although the middle one is greyed out. First of all, we have Client Permissions, and this is where we can set which Exchange users can access our public folder. Then of course we have Directory Rights, and this is where you can grant or deny permissions to change the email related attributes of a mail enabled folder. And then we have Administrative Rights, which is where we can set which users and groups can use the Exchange System Manager to change replication, file limits and other settings for this public folder. So let's go and have a look at the client permissions that are available. Now I won't go through all of these permissions as it's pretty obvious what they all do. I do recommend you take a look at these though. So to see which role gets assigned which permissions, we'd simply select a role down here in the role box, and the permissions down here will change to reflect whatever role we've selected in the box above. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll briefly discuss these permissions we see in this top box here, as these permissions were assigned to our public folder by default. Now the first permission we see here is default, and it has the role of author. Now the default group includes all Exchange recipients that haven't been added separately to this list of names. Now authors don't own the folder and they cannot create any subfolders. They can only add, edit and delete their own folder items. Now next we have the administrator with the role of owner. When I created this public folder I was logged on as administrator, so administrator is given the role of owner and the owner has complete control over the folder and its contents. And finally we have the anonymous account with the role of contributor. Anonymous users are users that do not have Exchange mailboxes. So an example of an anonymous user would be a user that accesses our public folder via an internet browser. Okay, the other one we had a look at was the administrative rights. So if we click on that, and here we just use the standard Windows access control list to configure which users and groups have permissions to change any of our sales public folder properties. Okay, now the next method of creating public folders is using the standard Outlook client. And I've gone ahead and previously installed Microsoft Office 2003 on this server. Now in most cases you probably wouldn't install the whole entire Microsoft Office suite, but that said, I've worked with organisations where they'd like to install Outlook on at least one Exchange server to assist them in troubleshooting. So the first thing we need to do is create a new mail account on this computer. So what we'll do is we'll click on Start, Control Panel, and then we'll select Mail. And then we'll select Email Accounts, and we'll add a new email account. We'll click Next, and this will be obviously connecting to a Microsoft Exchange server, so we'll choose that and select Next. Now we need to enter in the name of our Exchange server computer we wish to connect to, and then of course a username that we wish to connect as. So in the top box here we'll just simply enter in server01, and at the bottom we'll enter in the user of administrator. Now underneath our server here you'll see I have an option to use cached exchange mode. Now cached exchange mode gives us the ability to work offline when we have an unreliable link, but we'll talk more about this in a later video. So we'll leave this box checked, and then we'll come over here and click on check name. And what this will do is get the wizard to go off and check that our server and user account details do actually exist and are valid. And if it does, then we'll just get a visual cue that everything's okay by these two fields displaying the text with a line underneath it. Alright, so everything's cool, so now we can click on next, and then we're finished. So we'll just close this down, and now we can open up Outlook 2003. And when it starts up, you can see we're just getting a little balloon message which says that Outlook's setting up a local copy of our mailbox. Okay, now in Outlook 2003, public folders don't appear by default, even when you're connected to an Exchange server. But to display our public folders, we'd simply come down here and click on this little folder list icon. And then we can scroll down and we can see here we have public folders. Now before we get started here, I want to point out an error that you'll probably experience in your travels. If you recall that when we created our offline address list in the earlier video, we were told that it wouldn't actually take effect until the next maintenance interval. So what's going to happen if we hit send and receive or hit F9, which does the same thing, we'll get an error. Now this error isn't very informative, and it just tells us that the operation failed because an object couldn't be found. So what this error is really telling us is the offline address book cannot be synchronized. And you can ignore this error for two reasons. The first is that it won't affect any of our abilities to do other tasks in Exchange, such as send and receive email. And secondly, the error will go away by itself when the maintenance period kicks in. So by tomorrow, you shouldn't receive this error. So okay, anyway, back to our public folders. We could simply expand this, and you'll see we've got two options, favorites and all public folders. Now favorites is simply a folder in which you can link any public folder to it, so you can access it easily without having to navigate throughout the hierarchy of folders. And all public folders obviously list all the public folders that we have available. So as it stands, favorites will be empty. So if we expand all public folders, we can see that we've currently got two of them. We have Internet News Groups and the Sales public folder we created a moment ago. So if we want to create an additional public folder from within Outlook, we could simply right-click on all public folders and select New Folder. Now the first thing we're going to have to give our new public folder is a name, so we're going to call this one Marketing. Next we can specify what sort of items that we want to have inside our Marketing public folder. Now the default is mail and post items, but we can also choose calendar items, contacts, journals and so on. But I'll just leave the default, which is obviously mail and post items. Now in the tree below we can specify where we want this Marketing public folder to live in the public folder hierarchy. So if we leave it as it is, this will create the Marketing public folder at the root of the tree. So I'm going to leave this as it is, and I'm going to click on OK. And over here on the left we can see our Marketing public folder has been created. Now we can also create subfolders as well, of course, and to do that we'll right click on our Marketing public folder and we'll select New Folder, and we'll give this one a name of Ads. And we can see here at the bottom it defaults to the Marketing public folder, so we'll click on OK, and there we can see we do have a subfolder of our Marketing public folder. Alright, well the third method of creating public folders is via Outlook Web Access. So to open Outlook Web Access, we'll open up Internet Explorer and we'll navigate to the path of our server, which will be server01/exchange, so it'll be the name of your server /exchange by default, and then we'll hit enter. Okay, we're prompted with a dialog box to enter in a username and password, so we'll simply type in the administrator username and the administrator password and hit enter. Okay, and here we are in Outlook Web Access. Now by default in Outlook Web Access we don't see public folders, so on the left hand side we'll come down here and we'll select public folders, and this will open up a new window that points to the name of our server /public, and in here we can see our internet news groups, our marketing folder with the subfolder of ads, and of course our sales folder. So what we'll do is we'll create a new public folder underneath our sales folder, so we'll right click on sales and we'll select new folder. And this dialog box is identical to the one we saw in the Outlook 2003 client, so we'll just give our public folder a name and we'll call this one budgets, and then we'll click OK. And there you can see our new public folder. Okay, now up until this point all of the public folders we've created have been created as part of the default public folder tree. Now there can only be one default public tree, but you can create as many general purpose public folder trees as you like. The first thing to understand when dealing with general purpose public folder trees is that the standard Outlook client, in other words this one that comes part of Office 2003, cannot see them. Yes, you heard me correctly. A MAPI client cannot see any general purpose public folders. And the reason they can't see them is because general purpose public folders don't support MAPI, but they do support NNTP and HTTP. So this means that if you want to see your general purpose public folders, you'll need to use Outlook Web Access. So the first thing we'll do in order to create a general purpose public folder tree is to open our Exchange System Manager. And then we'll navigate through our administrative group, and then expand our New York administrative group, and then we'll right click on folders and we'll select new public folder tree. Now we need to give our general purpose public folder tree a name, so we'll just simply call this one customers, and then we'll click on OK. Now underneath our folders you can see our customers general purpose public folder tree. Okay, so the next step that we need to do is expand our servers, then expand the server on which we want to create a public store. Now we'll right click on our first storage group and we'll select new public store. Okay, the first thing we need to do is give our new public store a name, and I'm going to call this one external. And now we need to associate our public store with the public folder tree we created a moment ago. So we'll select browse, and we can see under our available public folder trees our customers public folder tree appears, so we'll select that and choose OK. So we'll click OK again and we'll be asked, do we want to mount our store, and we'll choose yes. Alright, and we can see our store was successfully mounted. Okay, now at this point we don't actually have any public folders within our new customers tree, so let's go and create a couple. So if we select our customers folder, in the right hand side you can see it's currently empty, so we'll right click on customers and we'll select new public folder. Now this is exactly the same as before, so we'll give this one a name and we'll call this one contacts, and we'll click on OK. Now if we expand customers we can see we do have a contacts public folder. Now the final thing we need to do in order to make this work is to create a new virtual server. Now this is the subject of another video, so we'll just give you a quick version here. So first we'll go and expand protocols, and then we'll expand the HTTP protocol, and finally we'll expand our Exchange virtual server. Now we'll right click on our Exchange virtual server and we'll select new virtual directory. Now the first thing we need to do is give this a name, so we're going to call this one again external, and then under the Exchange path we'll click on public folder. Now you can see here that this changes to reference public folders, and this is actually referencing the default public folders, which is not what we want. So we'll click on modify, and then we'll select our customers general purpose public folder tree we created a moment ago, and then we'll click on OK. Now on the Access tab, we can also set some IIS type permissions governing what we'll allow users to do, but we'll just leave these defaults and then we'll click on OK. Okay, at this point we're done. You can now fire up Internet Explorer and then browse to HTTP, the server name, followed by external, and then hit enter. And again, we'll have to type in our username and password. So we'll type in administrator and our password. And here we can see the general purpose public folder tree that we created with the contacts public folder. Now it's worth mentioning also that you might actually have to wait a few minutes for the configuration to complete within your Exchange organization, especially if you have a large Exchange organization. So if you experience any errors, just be patient. Go grab a coffee, and when you return, you should be looking at your new public folder tree. Now the next thing we should look at regarding public folders is the replication process. So we'll go back to our Exchange System Manager and we'll expand our public folders. Now what we'll do is we'll replicate our sales public folder to another Exchange server. So we'll right click on sales and we'll select properties. Now on the replication tab, you can see that we currently have one replication partner, and that's itself. But we can add replication partners by clicking on add and then selecting some partners from the available server list. Now we only have one other server, server 02, so of course we'll select that and we'll choose OK. Now technically that's it. We're done, and our public folder will replicate over to server 02 at the scheduled replication interval that's taken from this drop down box here. But if we want to change the replication interval, which by default is taken from the settings in the public store, we could change this by clicking on customize and then creating our own schedule. And all we have to do is click inside these squares to define the times which we want replication to occur. This screen's very simple, and you've probably seen something very similar to this in the Log On Hours button in the User Account Properties in Active Directory Users and Computers. But for those who haven't seen this before, a white box means that there's no selection, a blue box means that you've selected for replication. Now if we also click on the Details button, we can see the status of any replication attempts, but we don't have anything in here yet because our replication schedule hasn't kicked in. But in here you'll see things like the server name, the replication status, and then how and when things took place. Now we also have a replication priority, and it has a default priority of normal. Now if the contents of this public folder have to be replicated very frequently because our other servers must have up-to-date information, we can raise the priority here of replication so it gains the right of way, so to speak, when replication occurs. Now that's replication, but there's still another method of replicating our public folder tree, and that's kicking it off manually. And to do this, we could simply right click on our public folder tree hierarchy and select Send Hierarchy. Now this will open the Send Hierarchy dialog box, and this is pretty simple. We just need to select a source server and a destination server. So in our example, our sales public folder is on server 1, and we need to replicate it to server 2. So in the left hand pane, we'll select server 1 as our source server, and in the right hand pane, we'll select server 2 as our destination. Now if we click OK at this point, we'll actually get an error, and it tells us that our number of days must be valid from 1 to, well, a lot more than 1. I won't bother trying to work out what that number is. So what we need to do here is enter a value of greater than 1. So in other words, if we want to replicate only changes that have been made in the last week, we'd type in 7 for 7 days, and then we'd click on OK. Then we're just asked to confirm our decision, which kindly warns us that if we have a particularly large public folder, then this can cause a lot of network traffic. So if you're happy to proceed, just click on Yes. Okay, we've seen how to replicate an entire public tree hierarchy to a different server, but what if it's only a single public folder that we want to replicate? Well, in that instance, we can right click on the public folder, select all tasks, and then choose to send contents. And the dialog box we'll get is exactly the same as the one before. We just simply choose a source server and a destination server, and then click OK. Now one final thing I want to point out here about public folders before moving on is public folder referrals. When a user connects to a public folder and the public folder store doesn't contain the content that the user is requesting, Exchange Server 2003 will automatically, and behind the scenes without the user knowing, redirect the user to a server that does contain the content. And it'll first try servers in the routing group in which it belongs. And if none of them contain the content, it will attempt to contact the next routing group, and so on. But if we don't want this to occur automatically and would rather specify our own list of referral servers, so in other words, if you try server 1 and the content isn't there, don't go to server 2, go straight over to server 5. Well, we can do that. So to configure that, what we'll do is go under our administrative groups, we'll expand our New York, our servers and our server 01, and we'll right click on server 01 and we'll select properties. Now we'll go and click on the Public Folder Referrals tab, and here we can see the default option is to use routing groups as I said it would. So to change this to use your own preferred ordered list of servers, select the drop down box and choose Custom List. Now we'll come down here and we'll select Add, and as our only other server in our environment is Server 02, we'll select that and we'll click on OK. And now we can see that Server 02 has been added with a cost of 10. Now like with service records in DNS, the lower the number, the greater the priority. So if we had a Server 03 listed in here as well with a cost of 20, then Server 02 would always be tried first. So if you want to change this value, simply click on the server and then click Modify, and you can change the value here. Okay, we've now seen the three methods of creating public folders, and we've also looked at creating a new general purpose public folder tree and replicating our public folders. Public folders are a very useful method of storing and collaborating on documents, and now that Outlook Web Access has been beefed up to support public folders, even more people in your organisation will come to rely on them. Now in our next video, we're going to discuss the role that virtual servers will play in our environment.